Some lives change the world with speeches. Alan Turing changed it with questions. He wasn't built for noise or crowds, but his mind was a room full of lightning. Alan Matheson Turing was born on June 23, 1912, in Maida Vale, West London. The world around him was busy, while his inner world was already searching for order. As a child, he loved patterns, puzzles, and numbers, not because they were cold, but because they were honest. Numbers don't pretend to be something they're not, and Alan found that reliability comforting. He could be absent-minded in the way rare minds often are, the kind of person who misplaces a key but discovers a universe. School didn't always understand him, not because he resisted authority, but because he followed curiosity. He read science the way other children read adventure stories. To Alan, physics and mathematics were journeys into hidden worlds. There is a particular loneliness that comes from seeing farther than others, not because you are better, but because you arrive early. And Alan was early, standing at the edge of ideas that would later feel inevitable. In the early 1930s, Alan studied at King's College, Cambridge. There, he wasn't labeled or dismissed. He was simply Alan. He began asking a question that sounds simple and never is. What does it mean to compute something? At the time, computation meant human computers at chalkboards, following steps faithfully one after another. Alan wondered if a machine could follow steps the same way, not to think like a human, but to obey rules without error. So he did what he always did and transformed a foggy thought into a precise model. In 1936, he described an imaginary device we now call a Turing machine. It wasn't built from gears or wires, but from logic alone. Imagine a tape divided into squares holding symbols and a read-write head that moves left or right according to instructions. That simple structure, humble as it seems, could represent any step-by-step process. It's almost funny how unglamorous the setup appears, because the future of computing begins with a strip of symbols and rules. In that tape, Alan quietly outlined the boundaries of what machines could ever do. He also showed that some problems cannot be solved by any procedure at all. Not because effort fails, but because mathematics itself draws a line. This was not pessimism, it was clarity. And clarity, when offered honestly, is a form of respect. In effect, Alan was mapping the landscape of the possible, and he was careful to mark where the road ends. Then, history tightened its grip as World War II approached, demanding speed, secrecy, and sacrifice. Britain's codebreakers gathered at a secluded country estate called Bletchley Park. The German military relied on an encryption device known as Enigma. It scrambled messages so completely that it felt like magic, but magic dissolves when its rules are understood. And Enigma had a daily key. Every day, its settings changed, and every day Allied lives depended on breaking them in time. This was not a puzzle for intellectual pleasure. It was a race measured in ships, convoys, and lives. Alan arrived at Bletchley Park in 1939, bringing an uncommon calm under relentless pressure. He was not alone, and that matters, because victory here would always be collective. Many minds worked in parallel, each contributing fragments of insight. Still, Alan became central to a breakthrough that changed the pace of the war. Rather than guessing codes, he focused on structure, habit, and repetition. Human behavior, even under discipline, leaves patterns behind. If that sounds familiar, it should, because security often fails where predictability survives. Alan helped design machine-assisted methods to exploit those weaknesses. One such machine was called the Bombe. The name sounds dramatic, but the true drama was time itself. Breaking a message could reroute fleets and prevent ambushes. Minutes mattered, and sometimes minutes meant survival. Much of Bletchley Park's work remained classified for decades. The silence protected the future, but it also hid extraordinary people. Alan's role was part of a larger triumph of collaboration. Courage fought the war, and mathematics helped shorten it. There is an unseen heroism in work that leaves no signature, no medals, no headlines, only responsibility repeated day after day. Alan also had his quirks. He famously chained his mug to a radiator, a small solution to a persistent problem. When the war ended, the world paused to breathe. Alan, however, kept looking forward. He turned his attention to early computer design, long before computers resembled anything familiar today. He focused on stored program machines, systems that could keep instructions in memory. That idea changed everything. It transformed machines from fixed tools into adaptable ones. Put simply, the machine could now learn new instructions. Code became the tape that could be rewritten. Alan spoke and wrote about what computers might become. He saw them not as replacements for humans, but as amplifiers of thought, like telescopes for mathematics or microscopes for logic. He also studied how patterns form in nature, from animal markings to biological growth. His curiosity was never confined to machines alone. Alan's mind moved freely between disciplines. Curiosity itself was his engine. In 1950, he asked a question that still shapes modern discussion. Can machines think? He immediately recognized the trap hidden in the word think. So he reframed the problem into something observable. Not philosophy first, but behavior. He proposed what we now call the Turing Test, originally described as an imitation game. A human judge communicates with two unseen partners, one human and one machine. If the judge cannot reliably tell them apart, the result is meaningful. Not because the machine is conscious, but because performance can resemble intelligence. Alan never claimed machines would become human. He suggested they might one day act intelligently in ways that matter. He even predicted the objections people would raise. One common claim was that machines could never surprise us. Alan disagreed. Complex systems surprise us constantly, including our own minds. If you have ever been surprised by a mistake you made, you already understand. Complexity alone can produce the unexpected. What Alan gave the future was language, a way to talk about intelligence without mysticism. And he offered it humbly, not as a final answer, but as a fair test. But while Alan's ideas moved forward, the world around him was still catching up. Living inside that distance can be quietly difficult. In 1952, Alan was prosecuted in Britain for being gay. At the time, same-sex relationships between men were illegal, and his private life was pulled into the courts. This is one of the most painful turns in his story, not because it defines him, but because it changed the shape of his days. After everything he had contributed, his options narrowed. His security clearance was restricted, and parts of his professional life became harder to reach. In practical terms, doors that had once been open were no longer as accessible. He continued to think and work under heavy pressure. Even then, his curiosity did not disappear. And in the long view, this chapter leaves a quieter question behind. What happens to a mind that arrives early, before its time has learned how to respond? Alan Turing died on June 7, 1954, at the age of 41. The circumstances remain sad to consider, and they still invite reflection. What matters most is that he was lost too soon, and for many years, the full shape of his contribution was not widely understood. Decades later, the work at Bletchley Park became better known. What had been kept silent for security could finally be spoken about with clarity. Honors followed, along with formal acknowledgements. They cannot rewrite the past, but they can help tell the story more completely. Today, Turing is remembered as a founder of computer science and a pioneer of artificial intelligence. Yet even those titles can feel too small for what he set in motion. Because his real legacy is not a label. It is a doorway that, once opened, changed what the modern world could become. Look around us now. Computers in pockets, code in everything. Questions once impossible, now routine. All of it traces back to a simple idea, that instructions, carefully followed, can reshape reality. Behind that idea was a human being. Brilliant, awkward, gentle, stubborn, and deeply sincere. If Alan Turing left one lesson behind, it may be this: the future is often built by people who don't quite match the moment they're born into. Sometimes recognition arrives slowly. Later, it becomes clear that the beginning of something was happening in plain sight. Alan's life encourages respect for questions, not as trivia, but as compass points. It also suggests that intelligence is at its best when it remains connected to humanity. A culture can move quickly in what it can build. It can take longer to notice and protect what is delicate. Build better machines, yes, and build better care. Because brilliance can be fragile in ways that are easy to miss, and difference often fares best in gentler hands. If you ever feel out of step with your time, remember Alan. Being early can feel isolating, but early is not wrong. It is often how the future first announces itself. Alan Turing asked what machines could do. History answered that they could do far more than expected. But his deeper question was always about humans. What kind of world gets built around the minds that build the world? From enigmatic machines to voices that sound almost human, you're always welcome here. And remember, it's Illumentary.